Hi, everybody. We are back in 2022, and I want to thank all of you OWASP Nova participants for joining us again in the new year. I want to try and keep things as quick as possible, but I'll do a little bit of housekeeping at the end of the presentation. So for right now, we have Bill Manning, who is he works with JFrog, and he's here to talk all about SBOMs. So without any further ado, Bill, would you mind taking it away?
Yeah, no worries at all. How you doing, everybody? My name is Bill Manning. I am one of the solution architects and also the manager of our solution engineering department for North America, new business for JFrog. I've been with JFrog about 5 years. Just a little background on myself. I started off long ago. Obviously, you can tell from the white beard I have here. I started off as a software developer. I've been everything from software developer to CTO to venture capitalist, you name it. I'm a mentor of tech stars, 500 startups, you name it. I give back to the community where I can. But today I'm here to talk to you about software bill of materials. And before I talk about this, one of the things that I'm going to talk about when we are going through this is how do we get here, right? Because software bill of materials is technically, nothing new. Like just to be here at JFrog, we've actually had this concept for the past 8 years in the form of a thing called build info. But really what it comes down to is, why is it important in this day and age specifically? And, what was the catalyst for things like the US government to go and make this a mandate? And we'll talk about that too. But also the importance of why it's important for you as an organization. Let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 sec, and I'm going to share my lovely little presentation here. So there we go. I hope you guys can see it. So today's talk, of course, is demystifying, SBOM impact on software, basically secure software development for OWASP. It's a mouthful to say. But as stated, my name is William Manning. I'm at JFrog. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is just simply William Manning. You can call me Bill. I've been called a lot worse over time. But first of all, I just want to let you guys know that actually we'll put it into the chat. But for the first 25 people who go to the little URL that you see there below, we're actually going to be giving away a t-shirt, and we're going to be giving away our book called Liquid Software. It was written by a couple of individuals in the company. We all had a bunch of us, this is from a little while ago, a bunch of us had a lot of contributions to this. But the thing is that just so you know, go ahead, get yourself a free t-shirt and a book for the first 25 people. So let's talk about why. So of course we all see these tremendous headlines if you follow things like Hacker News, or you just follow Twitter and you go in and you search for all these various attacks that are happening in this day and age. One of the main features that we're going to be talking about here is basically securing your software supply chain, and this leads up to the software bill of materials being one of the end results. Because now in this day and age, you have things like there's a hacker exploit that might have happened, or one of the libraries, one of the third-party transitive dependencies that is being utilized somewhere has some sort of nefarious means, like this one here from npm. One of the things about it, what it did is it installed basically a Bitcoin miner into any sort of web services model that you're using. We always see these things, corporate data secrets are leaked and, from repositories, because last year alone, software supply chain attacks were up 650%. Let that set in for a minute, right? That's insane. The thing is as developers, we have this inherent trust. If you're building your software and you find the libraries that you need, non-dependent on type, whether you're doing it in Python, you're doing NuGet, npm, Go, you're doing it in Dart or whatever, or even those, you're doing Docker containers to host your application, or you're using it for your development. How do you know that the pieces that you're inherently bringing in are safe and secure? Because I've been doing this for decades now, and there's always this trust model. I need to get something done. I find a library that does something that parses a string the way that I happen to need it, or looks through a hash map and finds the values I need more expeditiously than something that I could write. Right? This is something we do as developers, and the thing is that this trust has been eroded. And it's been eroded because of various attack strategies that are done by the industry. We see this all the time. Supply chain attacks have been on the rise for years, right? I mean, this is nothing new. This has been around for a while. It's just that it's just ramped up in its volume over the last couple of years. I mean, and the big thing that really pushed it over the edge and really was, like I said, the spark that launched this whole idea of better software supply chain management and the ideas of actually having things like SBOM was, of course, SolarWinds. I mean, that was the one that really brought everything to prominence there, because over 18,000 customers globally were affected by this. And I'm going to talk about some of the aspects behind it on why this was such a bad thing, and all the various also attack methods that are being done in terms of supply chain attacks currently right now. This alone is a multi-billion-dollar remediation that is still in process to this day. There are still customers that we deal with that are still dealing with basically the fallout from actually the SolarWinds attack. But I mean, even recently, we've even seen other ones. I mean, Log4j was just 2 weeks ago. Log4j, one of the most prominently used actual libraries on the market, was so susceptible. It was incredible. The simple idea that you can inject a query into a logging structure that could cause detrimental harm to anything you're doing was terrible. But why are supply chain attacks so prominent? Why is it so, why does it seem to be happening more and more, and why is it on the rise? And then there's a couple of reasons, there's a bunch of reasons on why. So if you look at what I'm showing you here, you can get the idea that it's, first of all, it's super low effort. It really doesn't take a lot to actually get something nefarious into the stream of software supply chain, right? It doesn't take a lot of technical effort itself. And once it's in, and this can spread like wildfire. Remember, if any of you have ever worked with something like NPM, I mean, NPM is the most notorious. I'm an NPM developer. I built 2 companies using NPM before I joined JFrog as our base foundation for all the things that we did, because it was easy, it was swift, it was super, it was robust enough to do what we needed to do. But you type in a package that you want to use for, say, something a problem you're trying to solve. You put it into your package.json, you do an npm install, and it brings along 120 of its friends, right? I mean, that's just the way it works. I mean, the thing is that you have direct dependencies and you have indirect dependencies. You have the implicit dependencies that you state, and then all the indirect dependencies that come along with it that help you build your software. The other thing too is though it does have an abusive relationship in terms of trust, right? Because the thing is, when something comes in, there's a lot of the times you'll hear these whole approaches of throw the baby out with the bathwater, or the analogy of that is that in some cases, some of these supply chain attacks have tarnished the reputation of some of the best libraries out there. And a lot of this is not really, that apparent to most. And the thing is, though, is the biggest factor is it's so easy for an attacker to blend their way into the community. We see this all the time. Whenever we do some of these root cause analysis on a lot of this, at my company, we actually have our own security organization. We have our own research team that goes and looks at this and starts to give back into the information. We actually are a CVE provider. And the thing is that as we're doing this, we realize, as you trace it back, the thing is that these attackers come in, they infiltrated. Some of these attackers that they've actually started to, it's really difficult to hunt them down. We can get a generalized idea of where it came in. And the thing is that most of the time, some of these people, what they do is they come in and they start contributing as regular contributors. And so they're not even considered a suspect in this. And that's the problem that we see these days. And the thing is the reason why this attack, occurs is, you as a developer are inherently trusting of the things that you utilize to do your job. It's like having the proper tool set. You're a mechanic. You want to make sure you have the right tool set to work on it. You're a carpenter. You want to make sure you have the right hammer. You don't want to use a mallet for something that you might want to use on, say, a finishing hammer. These kind of things you want to make sure you have. And there's, like I said, this trust model that we have, when we go in, we define our transitive dependencies, we do our builds, we produce what we're going to do as our output, and, we go ahead and we give it to our customers. But the problem is that what happens if you introduce something potentially threatening? Suddenly it's in your code, and then it ends up at your customer, or it ends up in your installation, or in your web service, or your devices. Doesn't matter. The endpoint is not the case. The programming language is not the case. It's an inherent problem that is dynamic across the industry. And what happens is that a lot of the times it's not the direct dependencies that you use that actually cause these potential, nefarious things to happen to your software or potentially expose your company. Because let's face it, man, whether you're doing this on your own or you're doing this as part of your organization, no one wants to be a headline. Or no company wants to be associated to a headline where suddenly, blah, blah, blah company accidentally leaks all this data due to a software glitch, right? They'll always attribute it to a software glitch or something. Because in this case, even if you have a straight dependency model where you have your direct dependencies, a lot of the times these attacks occur in the indirect method. It's like, to give you an example, if you looked at the hierarchy of what happened inside of SolarWinds, the actual component that came along with it that caused the issue itself was like a third level dependency or a fourth level dependency. It was buried deep inside the software itself that was used to create it. And the best part about that is that was actually pretty beautiful in its execution, in the way it actually did it, was the fact that it didn't activate itself until the actual software was activated. Then it set off a timer for 14 days, and 14 days after it had started, that's when it starts to do the nasty deeds that it did. So when you bring this in, you're unintentionally bringing along all these other components with it, and you get the same effect. You can actually, trace a lot of this. There's plenty of sites out there where you can go ahead and you can trace these kind of movements of these binaries and how they are over time. Of course, there's products like VulnDB and others that are large repositories of this, and you can always check out all the standard CVEs. You can with OWASP and all that too. You guys know this. So the thing is that whenever I talk to anybody about this, whether I'm doing it in the public forum or I'm doing it with our company, the biggest thing is, remember, always having to tell people is 85 to 90% of the software you produce is somebody else's code base, right? We depend on these vulnerabilities. We depend on these libraries to do our job. And 99% of those, at least are contain at least some, is open source, and at least 75% of that has at least one open source component with a vulnerability associated to it. And the thing is that 49% of those has at least one high risk vulnerability. And when I say higher risk, I'm talking about, if you were looking at CVE, we're talking, up to the critical range here. And the best part is that 90% of the components that we use to build our applications are usually outdated by 4 or more years, or they were completely abandoned. One of the initiatives that's on right now is the idea of applicability and also to reputation. How reputable are these binaries? How applicable are these binaries and these potential threats to the actual things I'm doing? These are things that people are trying to go ahead and build, processes and also build other components around it to see if they can actually flush some of this out. And some of the things that we always talk about too, though, is the fact that, let me go back. 74% of these application vulnerabilities can be fixed by just a simple update. Like for me personally, when we work with our customer base here, we actually say, hey, the library you're using is potentially nefarious. Here's a potential remediation that can help you. But of course, that's always subjective to the usage of the actual components itself in the code. So when software attacks, there's many different attacks that happen. And when these attacks happen, was really, like I said, this is really the driving force of where we're going in terms of what is software bill of materials and, how it actually affects. Of course, you have different, different things like, typo squatting. You fat finger in the name of the library by accident, and somebody out there has either, written a library with, with multiple versions. They've branched it off. They've added in the garbage they want to add in, and you accidentally go ahead and you do some typo, and next thing you know, you're bringing in a library that could be potentially threatening or malicious. You have things like dependency confusion. Dependency confusion is always a real interesting thing. You do a search, and you're searching for a library, and maybe it's something like one of the examples I give is that we found is like PayPal, right? There's certain PayPal things they go out there. PayPal's a trusted name in terms of finance. In, the fintech industry, they have real high standards. Actually, a good friend of mine is one of the directors over there for security. Actually, he's my neighbor. And the thing is that, there's this level of trust that people have. Or, Apple, hey, they know what they're doing. Or, this is one of the biggest names in the industry, Netflix. Netflix, produces a lot of open source components to the community. Microsoft, who years ago, everybody knows this, right? They were the ones that were like, oh no, open source, and now they're actually one of the largest contributors to the open source community itself. But the thing is that these public dependencies like PayPal, we actually found this one in a issue we were researching, and when we did, we found out that one of the things that somebody brought in was PP Logger, Auth PayPal, and a couple other things, right? And everybody just assumed it had the name PayPal in it, and these were terrible. And what they were exploits. These are complete exploits that were actually being brought into certain things. And actually, this is part of a project I put together just to see how bad it was. And when I tested it, it basically exposed everything. It started opening a bunch of remote calls. It was terrible. It was just a horrible thing. But, being aware of this, because when you start looking at software bill of materials, one of the things about it is understanding the component analysis, the component graph of everything that you produce. So the thing is that, the best defense is a good offense, right? That's always the big adage that everybody always says. So when you start looking at this, all those things that we talked about led last year in May to the U.S. government saying, we need to do something, right? So the Biden administration enacted the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. As soon as that came out, I had to go download it and I had to read it. It was part of my job. And let me tell you, it took a lot of coffee and it took a lot of time to read it. I do have some legal background in my experience, so it wasn't too bad. But the thing is that when we look at this, Section 4 is the part that really stands out, right? This is the enhancing software security part. But then when we start going into Section 7, the thing says is that providers, a provider can purchaser a software bill of materials for each product directly or by publishing it on a public website. And what this really came down to is the U.S. government says we're not going to accept any software that is actually going to be something, we're not going to take it on trust. You need to provide us with basically a bunch of information about the software you produced so we can have it on record, so our security teams can go ahead and look at it. Lots of multitude of different reasons, but basically what it came down to is this became a mandate. And actually the thing is that I thought there was another slide in there. This whole thing, was actually enacted fully by the House, by the way, back in November. Just so you know, this is now a thing. But also, too, the software bill of materials mandate is now bled into the private sector, right? So now financial institutions, like I work with about, some of the top banks in the world, they've now adopted this. I know there's a lot of fintech, a lot of avionics, space industry, food industry, you name it, have adopted this strategy. And we're getting more, and my company is actually getting more and more calls on this all the time. Everybody wants to know what the software bill of materials is. And the thing is it's not new. This has been around for a while, right? As I stated before. And basically what a software bill of materials is, it's like when you get a box, in this case, of like German chocolate delight. I have no idea why I picked that, but I did. And really what it comes down to, it's the list of ingredients. In its simplest fact, it's a list of ingredients and also caveats too. Like in this case, the whole idea contains wheat, contains milk, these kind of things. But this is a way for you to have, if somebody gets your software and they request this, they can go ahead and do searches. And we have a lot of customers that I deal with personally that are saying, here's the list of binaries that we, these third-party transitive direct and indirect dependencies that we have approvals on or we don't have approvals on. They're usually based on some sort of analysis that was done using like OWASP or, using other tools to say, here's the list of the latest nefarious binaries. Does it contain this? Let's parse through it. And in the past, it would have been really super difficult for you to go in there and supply this. If a company came to you and said, hey, we want to buy your software, but we want to know every little piece of ingredients inside of it, a lot of companies would go, that's going to take some time. And trust me, I'm a dude who actually, went ahead. We had a product that we built. We did a lot of work for it as a startup, and we actually wound up selling this to Google and Motorola back in 2010. But part of the deal was during the acquisition, of course, and I've had a couple other acquisitions, you need to go through and do a breakdown of all the components and all the licensing that you use in your software and supply this as part of the M&A procedure. So they can go through it and make sure that you're not using someone else's software that is either purchased or whatnot that could actually potentially even interrupt a deal, by the way, in M&A, to say your software is not what it is actually cracked up to be. You've actually just written something on top of somebody else's because we can see everything that you've used. But this all comes down to is that when you look at something, I said, when I decided to put this talk together, I was hungry. I decided that, I didn't really want to talk directly about software when it came to this. But what it comes down to is cake. I like cake. I thought this was a funny cake. But anyway, what it comes down to is, how do you know what's in that cake? Well, here's all the ingredients that are in that cake. The thing is, though, it's 2 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, whatever. But this lets you know everything that is in this cake when you're doing it. But if you notice, there's certain things that aren't there. There's no instructions. So that's the thing, is when you think of software bill of materials, one of the sections I have when we talk about this is, some of the things that are misinformation around what software bill of materials should really entail. But this standard, just so you know, actually started back in 2018 by the Food and Drug Association and in conjunction with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Why? Medical devices. Medical devices run on software. There was a couple of incidents where medical devices, the software updates could potentially kill people. I actually gave another talk on this. It was a fun, scary talk about how software can kill. And the idea here is the same idea, is that the Food and Drug Administration said, hey, we do this for food. We're notifying our customers of the things that are involved in this. At the same time, we should also be aware of the software, which is like a bunch of ingredients that people are using in their medical devices. Actually, it was, it came down to pacemakers and insulin pumps. Right. And then other things, too, such as, ventilators. I mean, come on, it's been 2 years of hell here. Right. And, we all know about ventilators are now more than ever. And the thing is that it was a way for these manufacturers to provide accountability and provide this to the FDA when trying to get their devices approved, because it wasn't just the devices, it's the software on those devices that they wanted accountability for. So a software bill of materials is simply just a list of ingredients that makes up the software inside, right? It's everything from the libraries and modules that you have, both proprietary and open source, free and paid. The old joke of, everybody knows this one, right? Free as in speech, not as in beer. The thing is also, too, are they widely available and are they restricted in access? Other additional information, which is just as important, and this is super important, it's not just the libraries you use, both transitive and indirect dependency and direct dependency injections and all that. It also comes down to, what tooling was used. Is the tooling you use to actually create the safe? When I talk about that, I'm talking about CI servers, right? Like Jenkins or TeamCity or Bamboo or Azure DevOps or whatever. Other information such as what environment was this constructed on? Being able to actually have the information on how it was constructed, maybe some various settings. And some of the stuff you want to keep to yourself, but others you want to be able to provide. What settings and what version of these components were also used to build this, because sometimes some of the products that are being utilized in this case can be questionable by certain people in the industry. I've actually seen this before, where there are certain times where certain types of processes are frowned upon by certain agencies because of regulatory standards that they have to have. So what is it used for, right? When it comes down to it. So when it comes down to what it's used for, it's for anybody who produces software, right? I mean, what it comes down to is that. It's simple as that. It's a way to also have it so that anybody who's purchasing software or somebody who's choosing can get the information up front. Once again, it's like going to a supermarket and grabbing a piece of food off the shelf, looking at the ingredients on it and being like, crap, pine nuts. I'm allergic to pine nuts. I can't have this. right? It's the same kind of idea. It also allows people who are purchasing your software to go ahead, and even from a legal aspect, there's also a section on this that also includes licensing. The thing is that license compliance and governance is also a huge strategy behind this, that when people look at this, they can go through and say, okay, they used all these open source components. That's pretty normal, okay. But also too, you know what, there's a couple of licenses in here we don't like to adhere to. You know, maybe it's, you know, like it's the idea of like, you know, having like a GPL and an LPL, right? It's like, it's, you know, they don't really coincide well together. And being able to look at it and say, well, we don't accept these types of licenses because our organization has mandated it from our legal team. I've heard the slew of different excuses from various companies over my years on, you know, certain components. And I've had to do this in the past with some of my other software products, some open source stuff that I attributed to, and also stuff that I've done in the corporate world. And the thing is that this is really a way of accountability, right? For asset management, you know, license compliance management, being able to also too, if something goes wrong, look at SolarWinds, look at Log4j. When Log4j came out, we actually released an open source tool for people to go ahead and search the software that they're utilizing to find all the instances of Log4j. Right, because it's been used by so many people. Or the thing is they want to make sure they can go, hey, bring up that SBOM for all the software we produce. Let's do a, you know, we'll use either CycleNTX or SPDX. We'll talk about those formats in a little bit. But you know, let's go ahead and let's write a parser, or let's put it into a software bill of materials, you know, management system, and let's do a search to make sure that none of the software that we built or is purchased actually has this potential threat inside. Because identifying this is actually a very, very, very important thing. So the thing is that, you know, this helps identify, you know, all the potential threats that might be in the software you produce and provide to your customers, both for yourselves as a corporation or as a developer who might be delivering, you know, billing out open source projects, for your organization that you work at. So this way you can go in and say, hey, by the way, once again, you know what, we discovered that 4 of the products that we're currently using right now contain this potential threat. We should really contact the actual vendor and ask them. It's also a way for you to go in and manage the licenses that you have. Like I said, do never, never, never discount the power of legal, right? And most of you guys, you know, if you haven't been directly affected by this, you know, I have a couple of times, you know, having to go in front of legal and explain the reasonings why, and then having to go back with my tail between my legs and say, all right, guys, we need to go back and we need to go ahead and refactor based on what we've learned from a legal standpoint. We're not allowed to use this, or we're not allowed to do this, whatever. It's also a way for you to go ahead and, like I said, and also, you know, get a comprehensive information on, you know, on how something was constructed. Now, this helps internally more than external. Right? You can exclude the actual environmental and system information that you provide to your customers, because in most of the cases you don't have to. But one of the things that gets exported as part of that is this. And this actually can help you also track over time. You know, how you're building your software. Have you changed anything? Did the version of Python change that when I built this thing? You know, we upgraded the version between this and this, and since then we've been having issues with, you know, with velocity in terms of speed of where we're doing our transactions. You name it, right? There's a lot of information in here, and at the same time too, one of the greatest features of this is it actually reduces a bunch of actual cost internally in terms of having to do this. I just had a customer recently who talked to me and said, hey, with the stuff you showed us, our root cause analysis that we were doing on some of our particular builds used to take us days or weeks to compile together and bring it to the team and get an assessment. Now we can go in and do a search, pull it together, and it's minutes or hours, right? So, you know, we've actually cut down on the amount of time. It also allows you to go in and make sure that when you're doing your build processes, you're not now wasting time trying to figure out why. You can actually enact it quicker, because faster responses actually means that you can get back to work better and also provide faster features and hopefully, you know, or fixes to you, or some sort of remediation to your customers. And when you're doing this, one of the big benefits behind that is of course, you know, making sure that you ensure that trust level with your customer base, right? So it allows you to act faster, act quicker, remediate more effectively, and then do it in such a way that you're not wasting time trying to find this stuff. In the meantime, your customers have gone and talked to your competitors who have said, hey, we've already addressed this because we did it, we did this like a week ago. And you're like, here, 5 weeks later, here's the patch that you need to do. Sorry, let me take a little drink of coffee here. Now,
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
There is a question
No
here.
worries.
I didn't know if we wanted to address it now or.
Sure. Let me go ahead. Can I see them? I don't know if I can see them.
I can post it on the screen.
Oh, sorry. I actually no. I actually have it. Well, I have it on one browser window and I have another, so I didn't see it over here to the side.
Cool. I can try and rephrase it a little bit too, but it's basically just Log4j had 3 critical CVEs that go back to 2017. So
yes,
4 or 5 years ago now, which is scary. Why didn't we react back then? And I know that you can't speak for the industry, but what are some of the reasons why now is the big problem?
Well, it's very simple. Is that I think what it was is that all this stuff has been here, like I said, for much longer than even 4 or 5 years ago with even some of these components, right? Some of the stuff has actually been going on far longer than that. And this has actually been something inherent in the industry for forever. It wasn't until it became major. I mean, like I said, the one that really sparked everything was, of course, SolarWinds. It was on the news more than anything I'd ever seen. I was like, when I read about the initial SolarWinds thing, I was like, oh, this is going to be terrible. But I didn't realize how bad it was going to be until I turned on the news and it was on every freaking news station that was out there. And this suddenly became the thing. And it's interesting because I think it raised awareness, like I said, to something inherently terrible in the industry sometimes that's behind the scenes that we just deal with, right? We've just dealt with it over time. In a lot of cases, most companies, I'll tell you right now, so many companies I know do not check the third-party libraries they use. So that even with Log4j, even with those high CVEs, so like back in 2017 and 2019, and I think there was one actually in 2014, and that's 2015 maybe it was. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. Most companies were completely unaware because they never checked. Right? Nobody ever really sat down, and there was a lot, we might run an analysis to say, is there some things, but this has been around for a while. But you'd be actually surprised how many major companies out there in the world are only recently, over the past couple of years, really starting to adopt the idea of this kind of level of security, even though there's other products out there like Sneak, which is relatively new, but you have like Prisma that was, that is now part of Synopsys, or, Aquasec, right? Like that, or even like for JFrog and us, right? With X-Ray, or, the thing is that, all these tools that are on the market, the adoption of them are there, but the actual implementation was actually sparse in a lot of cases. I hope that makes sense. All right. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Let's see.
We can have known vulnerabilities. I see here it says, but it takes a known exploit to make it dangerous. As yes.
Yeah, that was something I just threw in there too.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. Seriously, like like I said, the SolarWinds thing was just a spark. People all of a sudden started questioning, right? I mean, like I said, this stuff has been around forever. I mean, how many exploits have been there out there for like the iPhone, where they're like, oh, you go to this URL and suddenly your phone goes into an infinite loop, right? Because it was exploiting a bug somewhere in a software library, or somebody, all these records got leaked, and the reason when they got leaked is that people were like, oh, the hackers got in. Right? But how did they get in? In a lot of cases, it's just exploiting something that's been there, right? They just happen to go in and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to try all the stuff I have to get in. And hey, look, you know what? These guys actually had an RPC thing that was open. I took a look and it was a web page. I right-clicked, I viewed source. I traced all the things back into it because I didn't do a very good job of hiding anything. So I clicked in and I said, hey, look, I happen to know there's an exploit here and I know how to do it, right? I mean, there's these things that just happen over time. It's insane to me sometimes, but now it's like, it's a thing, right? And then now that the government's actually recognized this as a thing, Now it's even bigger, right? And it's become, more apparent and more in the industry. And now everybody's trying to firefight we're not the only ones talking about software supply chain security now, right? I mean, the number of talks out there is incredible. When I started giving these talks like 4 years ago, people were like, oh, that's cool. It's a nice to have, right? It was like, oh, this is nice to have. We'll probably use it. And I'm like, all right. And now people are like, how do I get my hands on something that's going to let me know? Right? It's now become a mandate. There's companies that have budgets now. They're like, we need to address software supply chain. And the problem is, though, we also want to avoid things like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term like cargo culting. Right? This always happens. If you worked with a big industry, your CIO, your CTO, a VP of something goes to a conference, sits down, some guy gets on stage, does a big scary speech about something and says, this is where you need to go. And then suddenly that CIO comes back and says, hey, managers, get together. We need to do this. We need to enact this as a KPI in 2022. Get it done. Without understanding the context. And we see this all the time. I gave a talk with this guy named Baruch, who's also a guy I work with. We actually give a talk called Songs of Ice and Tire Fires. And the whole idea behind it is that, there's all this talk, but now there's little action in a lot of cases. And a lot of it comes back to not having the context behind doing something, right? Not having the context to make the proper decision. And this was one of those cases initially, right? We saw a lot of firefighting coming from companies where we suddenly just saw this ramp up of customers contacting us going, I've got to stop this, and we're like, okay, tell me why. And a lot of companies could never put it into words, to be honest. We want to be safer. That's great. Everybody wants to be safe. We want to protect our customers. Of course, that's your job. Your job this isn't a nice to have. This is your job, to protect your customer base. But the thing is that nowadays, this has now become a thing. It's really amazing. Like I said, SolarWinds and the cost associated scared the crap out of tons of companies. They were worried about liability. Oh my God, we did something terrible. We used something. And then, there became that whole, let's throw it all away and start from scratch. And that's not the way to do it, right? It's, logical approaches and calm and cool minds will actually prevail in this case. But having the right tool set to make those incredible decisions is also a big factor too. And having knowledge and maps about what you do help you actually plot a better course. Right. And that's what software bill of materials really does. It's actually another enablement feature for you to have a better course of action in times when things go terrible.
Makes sense.
So, of course, what's that? Oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just said makes sense. I'm sorry. I'm getting out of here. It's all
your no. It's cool. It's all cool. So actually what I'm going to do is let me move my other window to the side so I can see if you guys are asking questions. I think that's a better idea. Oops. Give me a second here. Can you guys still see my screen still? Cool. All right. So software contains a lot of stuff, right? I mean, that's what we're just basically coming down to. There's a lot of components inside. So I'm going to talk about cake because I like cake. Like I said, I actually put this together when I was hungry. My bad. Sorry if there's any diabetics out there. I apologize now. Don't cancel me, please. But, at the same time, it's a really good analogy to actually, go ahead and do. Look at a cake, right? It's a nice, beautiful cake. It looks very tasty. If you don't like chocolate, I'm sorry. But, at the same time, right? Cake is made of many different parts, right? And your software is too. We know somebody made it, right? So we know that. We also know that, somebody had to mix this together and do something. We know that it was put into an oven, unless you're doing, of course, one of those like cakes that you put in the sun and it bakes and stuff like that, whatever. Of course, it might be decorated or not, whatever. It could be tasty. It probably is tasty, like I always make the joke of saying. And we know it used ingredients. We know that there's stuff in here, that the end product is the cake, but there's accumulation of parts that made up the cake. So when we look at this comes back to it again, right? So once again, here's the cake and here's the ingredients, but there's also so much more involved with it. And this is what I was talking about before. which is also too, we know there's instructions how to assemble these actual pieces that made this cake up. And this comes down to your environmental and system information, your what CI server was it produced on your desktop, what version of the actual software did you use? Did you use, like I said, are you using Python 2.7 or using Python 3.4, whatever? You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what was the execution that you actually used to compose your software, and it can be everything from compiled software to real runtime software. We start getting into like npm and web services. It can be Docker images, whatever. Whatever is used to assemble the things that you do has not only components, but it also has instructions. But what if we change the instructions too? And this is where I was talking about before. By having a software bill of materials, what if, instead of using baking soda, right, that we're going to say here, what if somebody actually used baking powder? And you're talking to somebody here, by the way, who's done this by accident. When I was less skilled, in the actual kitchen, that kind of thing, you get different outcomes. But understanding what went wrong is really the case here. Baking soda on the left, baking powder on the right. Yes, there is a difference. So when we look at this, let's go back to our software example again, right? Here's my software, here's those transit dependencies I use to build my software. And then what I used to do, it gets put into a software bill of materials, right? So the software bill of materials is the list of components and ingredients that I use to bake my software. And I can supply this information to my customers as a level of assurance, basically telling them that I'm willing to show them, or I have to show them, because I'm going to tell you right now, when a lot of these regulated industries are going to start demanding this level of information from your company or from your contributions to software, because they want to make sure they can protect themselves. And if we go in and say we changed it, say we did change out, baking soda for baking powder, this is going to change the way the the way the actual software is cooked, or in this case, our cake is cooked. We can go in and we can adjust the software bill of materials. So this way we can actually go in and then somebody can compare these two software bill of materials for two different versions and say, okay, there was a deviation change between these two levels of software. And if there's something terrible inside, this also means that I can go in and see in my software bill of materials, is this part of it? I read something, like I said, in Hacker News that said, hey, by the way, oh, sorry, I made you hungry, dude. The software bill of materials, the whole thing is that, I can go in and say this component is actually, does contain it. And the other thing too is that when I start collecting all these different software releases and software bill of materials, I can go in and say, oh, by the way, this nefarious component, or this one, unregulated piece, or this piece with a faulty license, it doesn't matter. Here's the versions of software that it affected. This means, like, I call it blast radius. When anything is actually found in terms of third-party direct or indirect dependencies in software, you want to know the blast radius. Because also, by the way, the thing is that a lot of these components that you might be utilizing are also used in other pieces of software, not just a single piece of software, especially if you have multiple different types. If you're running, like I said, like a multi-tier web service or whatnot. The thing is that understanding the effect of something that could affect your software and understanding how far it went back and how long it's been introduced. This actually goes back to what John said before, right? CVE is going back to 2007 and 2017 and 2018, right? And the thing is that, being able to understand how far back this all went is very essential. And this allows for companies to have risk mitigation, remediation, releases and press releases to say, yes, we've actually known this. Let your customers know. Your customers would rather you be honest with them to say, look, we addressed the issue, and just so you know, we realized nothing affected it, but you know what? This issue went from this release today that we just gave you without the issue all the way back to 2015. We didn't know. Here's a report on the issue. It was only discovered recently, or it was only exposed recently, but just to let you know, it affected other components too. So what about cakes with a lot of layers? And I see there's a question here. It says, let's say I create an SBOM in an app I deliver to you. If I add version numbers, does that overshare my vulns to you? No. Actually, so you actually need to include the actual version numbers of the software. Software bill of materials, one of the components of it, if you look at the SPDX or Cycling DX format, is versioning, because you do need to make sure that you give the actual version number of the actual software component that you have. But let's talk about, like, what about a cake with lots of layers, right? I always love talking about this, right? Each component was created differently, right? Each has its own set of ingredients. Each could have been made by somebody else, right? You don't know. It might have been assembled by a team of people. It might be different teams of people. It could be different companies, right? You know what? Together they do something. In this case, once again, I'm sorry if I'm making you hungry, but once again, they come together because, like in this case, I might have made the cake, but I bought the frosting, and I'm putting a trust in the company that produced the frosting. I'm saying, oh, you know what? This frosting is good. I'm going to probably eat what's left over with a spoon afterwards, when I haven't used everything. But how do I know that that's safe? I'm putting trust in the manufacturer of the actual, in this case, the frosting itself, or the cream layers in between. It might be another thing, right? And the thing is that, it might come from different locations even, and depending on its purpose, the thing is that you don't know, what each piece will actually do. In some cases, you don't care, right? You might just depend on it, but at the same time, you want to know everything about it. So, if you were to look at it like a web service, right? I always say I love my web services layer cake, right? Each one of these is an independent entity that's part of what you're trying to do, right? So, like I said, the frosting is Helm, Helm frosting. Then we have layers, 0, 1, and 2, and then the base cake, right? These could be independent. Each one of these would have its own separate software bill of materials. So when you look at it, like I say, a Docker image, even a Docker image will have multiple layers inside of the software bill of materials, because you can still release your software as a Docker image, right? Everybody knows this. Some customers are like, we actually virtualize everything. Here's our Helm chart, download it, install our software, and run it, right? Once again, there's an inherent trust. Here's the instruction set I gave you to go run the software. It's going to pull it from somewhere and bring it into my system and run it. Well, the software bill of materials will also encapsulate the Docker image. It should include the OS, the runtime, and the application layer. Each one of these is independent. This also includes system environmental settings inside the container itself. What were the paths? What version of the runtime was used to actually run the application? This is also good for you as a developer, because then you can also say, if this one was running worse than this one, what changed between these? And by having a software bill of materials basically build information on what you're producing, you actually have the ability to go in and make better choices, and also go in and say quickly, oh my, something did change between this. You know what? We actually changed the path on where the execution of the runtime is. And oh God, Bob left on, oh, thanks a lot, Bob. Bob left on the debug flag again. Right? So everything's slow because it's filling up my logs. And we have to go back in and we have to do another build and we have to do another deployment without debug flag left on. Well, let's talk about web services, right? So each one of those containers would have its own web service. Even the Helm chart, right, can even have information around it. And at the end of the day, when you are building this, if you do find something nefarious, you can go ahead and look through all those bill of materials and find out what it affected. So the thing is that, when we start talking about, SBOM, stuff, right? Things you need to keep in mind, right? Of course, it's all about DevSecOps, right? By the way, just so you know, and you guys will probably get mad, but like I've stopped even using the term DevOps. I have. I don't think it's really appropriate anymore. I think DevSecOps should be the term from now on. I think every level of security aspect should be part of our vocabulary. It should be part of our terminology. I think that, I see the world as a better place, like world peace, so I feel like right now. But, the whole idea of there's a level of responsibility we have as developers, as whether we're release managers, whether we were software developers or security engineers or QA, whatever. There's a level of responsibility we have, and understanding, like what CI tooling, when was the software built? Am I using something that's 5 years old? right? Did it, internally, what stages of the SDLC, right, software development lifecycle, did it go through? I want to know. I want to know QA's data on what they tested when we released this product, and how did they get through, how did it slip through their hands, right? I could be that guy. What FOSS software was used, right? Once again, it comes down to the whole idea, free as in speech, not as in beer, right? The idea of, what FOSS, was used when actually compiling this. What environment was this done, right? What, in this case, what oven was my cake baked in, right? I might want to know these things, because maybe in some cases where I've helped some of our customer base, they'll go through, and some of the issues they run into actually might be in the process they're actually using. It might not be in the software tools they're doing. It might be something injected accidentally as an artifact somewhere inside of what they're doing, right? As part of the, the build procedures. And I also want to know, where's, any of the security and vulnerability analysis behind this, because it should be part of the process. These are things that we need to keep in mind, of course. But on top of that, understanding, the composition of everything we do through the software build materials, it's like having a really excellent map and being able to quickly go ahead and look instead of trying to find out, did somebody change something? So, some of the misconceptions that we get all the time, I've actually, is this a roadmap to the attackers? No, it's not, because really what it is just a list of, materials. I mean, look at something, like I said, the cake example included instructions. But what happens if I get a software bill of materials, in this case on Twinkies, right? I look at Twinkies, I look at the ingredients on that. Some of the ingredients I can't even pronounce, but the thing is I know, like, there's Red 5 or something, like in some things that I do or whatever. At the same time, it's just a list of components. Without understanding how to assemble those components, it doesn't make a difference. Yeah, there could be information in there on a susceptible library, but hopefully you as an organization has actually gone in and attributed to that. No, it doesn't require source code. You do not need to give source code at all. I would actually, if anybody asks you for your source code, unless you sign some sort of massive legal document that says that they're not going to do anything with it. I mean, I have worked with companies. We have actually, in the past with another company that I had, they were like, we want to keep your source code in escrow, just in case you guys go out of business. And I thought it was the most bizarre request I've ever had. But in this case, that wouldn't be part of it, right? The software bill of materials does not require source code. It is simply the list of things that are in there. And then also too, could expose my intellectual property. Once again, it's like magic or something, right? You can have all the ingredients to make the wicked brew that you want to do to turn something into something else, but unless you have the actual instructions, or you might have some knowledge that you want to do it, you're not going to be able to do it. You don't have to expose any intellectual properties. You're not releasing your algorithmic structures. You're not releasing any of the magic secret sauce that you're doing with these components that you're doing. You're simply supplying a list of components for people to work with, to look at, to say, this is cool, this is not, or, if there's software changes that have taken place, does something change? Also, too, in a lot of cases now, companies just want to have these on record, right? Because in the case for, in any sort of regulatory thing, regulations in some cases apply where they need to have this on, on location. It also comes down to if you have your own company and you get into an M&A situation and they ask you for any information about your software, you don't have to be like me, where we went through and spent 6 weeks pulling this together and also removing any potential things that might have actually caused the deal to go sour, because we used maybe a library that was a paid library and they don't want to use. That took us weeks and weeks to pull that together. This, we could have actually, if we had software bill of materials, we could have looked at it, handed it to them, and their legal team could have given us back to us in like a day and a half or 2 days. It was terrible. So remember, number one, if you're working with the U.S. government, you need this to work with the U.S. government now going forward. It needs to list all the FOSS and also paid libraries. So anything you've used to compose it, right? You need to, in some cases, you need to have it. You don't really need to give it to them, but in some cases, they will ask you, of course, how, what, and when something was made, right? When was this done? What was used to compose it? And how old is it? in a lot of cases. Are you giving me the latest version, or am I using a version from last year? On top of that, for auditability and traceability purposes, a clean accountability of all the software you do, and also for software license and compliance. Once again, by the way, in the beginning, we said, here's, for first 25 people. Everybody here today, by the way, you can go ahead, scan this QR code. This will also allow you to go ahead and we say, book and shirt combo for the win, but there's also another giveaway as part of this. And then overshare. Wait, did I overshare? But thank you. That's all I got today, guys. Any questions or anything? I hope this has been helpful. I don't know if this is what you exactly wanted, but I tried. Let's see here. It says, we need more tooling to go through all the SBOMs we receive and let us know what the vulnerabilities are. Yeah, I'm gonna let so just to let you know. I mean, I'm not going to do a product plug, but I'm just going to say is in our product, actually, anytime you actually publish a build into our product, Artifactory, with our X-ray product, we actually have now the export feature to do export SPDX and CycloneDX formats with all the components behind it. And it says, what tools you use to automate SBOM generation? Yeah, there's other ones out there too, right? Of course you can do. But if you're using a binary manager like us, this is just an easy model to follow. In a lot of cases, there are some things out there. We actually, I think, we'll see more tools that'll go through and do parsing. We actually, we have a CLI tool where you can actually go ahead and do a comprehension model and component analysis of all the pieces you're using and get back into various components. But you can also, there's other methodologies. There are other tools out there that do that. And it says, what level of granularity is required to create an SBOM? So the thing is, it's everything. So it's not just the implicit or the actual direct dependencies that you're utilizing. It's also all the indirect dependencies that come associated with it. It's like inviting 5 people to your house when you're in high school for a party and 200 people show up, right? You need to make sure you get everybody's name of those 200 people, for better or for worse, in case they trash your house, right? I'm not saying I know this from experience. Let's see here. We would love to see JFrog join in here to be sure Artifactory supports the workflow we were thinking. Yeah, so we're governance board members, by the way, of the Cloud Native Foundation. Just so you know, right? So that's one of the things that we are. Actually, anytime you guys use Kubernetes, you can thank one of our employees named Remus. He's actually one of the co-creators of Helm. So we do a lot of this. But yeah, I mean, I would love to, by the way, if you guys are working on this, I see that there's, anytime, please feel, I would love to be part of this whole thing. We are super into the community. We've been doing it for, we're a major contributor to, open source and stuff for years now. I personally have been part of, open source projects in the past. I was a PM for a company called Aptana a long time ago. We produced the open source compatibility stuff around parsing and linting and all that stuff back in 2007, 2008, long ago. But yeah, I mean, any questions, guys? I mean, besides that, I mean, and thank you for your time, and I'm honored to be your first talk of the year. I hope you guys have enjoyed it, having me here. So I've enjoyed doing this.
Cool. Yeah, we absolutely appreciate you being here and speaking with us, and want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy night or busy afternoon to
the time difference thing is all messed up now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's all weird. I'm a California guy. I'm in San Jose, California right now. So
right, but we do absolutely appreciate you coming in and sharing your knowledge. And it seemed like we had some good discussions here too. So this was, this is a great way to start off 2022.
Right on, guys. Right on. Well, thank you so much.
Just a few more things for everybody else listening. So we have a talk. I believe it's going to be February 17th. That's going to be Mike McCabe, Ken Toller. It's tentatively scheduled for the third Thursday in February, so I think that's the 17th usual time. And they're going to be talking about scaling cloud security. So please come in and come back to a regularly scheduled time. I'm also going to try and push this year for more interaction within our Slack channel. So right now it's just Abdullah and Sean and I being kind of alone in there, trying to organize everything. So I'll post that invite link in our meeting. Maybe throw it in a couple of emails if I send those out for preparation for next month. And one last thing, we're sort of starting to send feelers out there for more speakers and for potentially helping us manage this OWASP meetup chapter and planning for the upcoming meetups and helping us out with social media, Twitter, etc. So if anybody's interested, please reach out to myself. Please reach out to Abdullah. Please reach out to Sean, or you can do it in the Slack channel. I'm going to just throw that one out there. So thanks again for all of you for joining us. And thank you again, Bill, for speaking tonight. Let me just put the invite link for Slack in there. And then, cool. So then we are all ready to go. So see you next time, everyone. And thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody.
Enter the raffle. Get your shirts, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers, everyone.
The book.
Rock on. Be safe. Be well, everybody. Cheers.
Take care and see you.
Thanks.